Hello everybody, this is Refresh and I am here to take a look at the United Assault Challenger deck for Magic the Gathering. This is from the 2019 standard, and on the back it says you can swarm the board with more small but resilient creatures than your opponent can possibly remove, take advantage of go wide synergies, and win the game with a few massive attacks. This includes a 60 card deck, 15 card sideboard deck box, and spin down life counter. And let's go ahead and take a look at the contents. Inside we have one red spin down life counter, don't know why it's not white, a spacer, and our deck. We have our main deck here, our sideboard here, a ad sheet, and a divider to just separate your sideboard from your main deck. Let's go ahead and take a look at the main deck. Alright, pretty simple aggro deck here with a little bit of life gain themes. Here's our sideboard. Alright, and that is everything. I'm going to play this deck against its peers, and I'll be back to let you know what I think. So United Assault is, I think, the quintessential white weenie deck, and it has a little bit more going on with it just beyond being a pure white weenie deck, but it's pretty close to just being a white weenie deck. You have a ton of 1-drops, and you're going to try to play them quickly and to overrun your opponent as fast as possible before they can get their footing. And it feels bad for your opponent to use expensive removal spells on your 1-drops, and so part of the value is that. The sub-theme that this deck has is a little bit of life gain, with the Leonin Vanguards and the Healer's Hawk powering your Ajani's Pridemates to get stronger, and that life gain will also help you pay for Adanto Vanguard's indestructibility. This card right here, Adanto Vanguard, is part of your win condition for the deck because it can hit for 3, and you don't really care that much to block because it's very bad as a blocker. I mean, you can pay 4 life for it to chump block anything, but for the most part, you want to be turning your card sideways. And once you go wide, you are able to use the Pride of Conquerors to smash in for a little extra, or you can have a Benalish Marshal to pump your team. It also has the very powerful History of Benalia here as a source of value, and that's pretty much it. The Dauntless Bodyguard here, I think, is an important player because it protects your Pridemates and your Benalish Marshals, which are not resilient. And so that is something that you want to make sure that you play after you play your Pridemate or your Benalish Marshal. If it's one of your few 1-drops in your early hand, I would still play it because you need to get as much damage as possible to try to go wide and try to finish your opponent off if necessary. That said, like a lot of white weenie strategies, this can be a little fragile, and the entire deck can be blocked up by the wrong creatures on the opponent's side of the board, and you don't have a ton of removal to deal with those effects. You have 3 Conclave Tribunals. That's pretty much it. The rest of your deck is all tuned to going aggro against your opponent. And there is a little bit more resiliency in this deck offered by the Legion's Landing, which if you are able to flip it, and a lot of times you will be able to, then you can generate 1/1s with lifelink, which again work with the Pridemate theme. And the History of Benalia gets you 2 knights before you can attack. And it will actually pump a few of your creatures, not a lot. It will pump the Marshals and it'll pump the Bodyguards, as well as the knights that it generates. But it's mostly there just to get you more bodies on the board quickly and to attack for the win. And I think the simplicity of this deck in some ways helps it, in the sense that newer players will be able to figure out what it's trying to do very quickly and adapt to it without really needing much guidance. However, there is a lot of tight play needed for this deck to be successful because you really need to work on getting your opponent's life total down as fast as possible so that eventually, even when your opponent thinks that they're able to stabilize, you go wide and you smash and you attack and use Pride of Conquerors for the last few points of damage to finish them off. So, let's talk a little bit about this sideboard here. Some of this is straightforward. The Shield Mirror is really obviously used against red decks, and the Knight is used against black decks. There is additional removal here, and I think you can figure out that the Tocatli Honor Guard is supposed to be used against decks that have a lot of enter the battlefield abilities. And the Make a Stand, I think if your opponent is playing cards like damage-based Wraths or something, then the Make a Stand is useful to prevent your team from getting completely wiped out. Because if you get 2 for 1 or 3 for 1 with this deck, there is a good chance that you're not going to be able to get through and win. So this deck is fragile to 2-for-1s, 3-for-1s, and card effects like that, and you need to make sure that you are paying attention to what your opponent is playing so that you can play around that. Like, you need to slow your game down sometimes and not just play everything in your hand, because if your opponent has a Wrath or they have a 2-for-1 or something like that, then you need to be able to rebuild, right? But the slower you play, the more likely that your deck is not going to get there. And so there's a lot of second guessing what your opponent is up to, what they might have in their hand, and making sure that you are adapting your strategy properly, which increases the difficulty curve of playing this deck well. And I think that its peak is nowhere near as strong as the Lightning Aggro deck in the same group of challenger decks, but I think it's just as easy to grok what you're trying to do with this deck. And so it's an easy deck to pick up and learn what it's doing in general. I think it's a hard deck to master and to play effectively. It's still fun though, and I do wish that it was a little bit more focused in terms of what it's trying to do. I appreciate that there is a life gain sub-theme here, but I think that the Pridemates are so vulnerable in many ways that a lot of times they're going to get to 3-3, maybe 4-4 before they get shot down. And so I don't know if that's enough time for them to be particularly good, and I guess I'm just going to be hoping that they offer enough of a threat in this particular deck. But for the most part, if you like aggression and you prefer more creature-oriented strategies rather than the burn of the mono red aggro decks, then this is an option for you, and it's nice to have a different type of aggro deck that you can play. If you've had a chance to play with this deck or the fully upgraded mono white aggro deck in the format, let me know what your thoughts were. I think one thing that this deck really could have used are some 1/1 white vampire creature tokens, as well as the token from the Hunted Witness, as well as the Knight tokens from History of Benalia, because it has a spin down life counter, but without the tokens you have to like find stuff. If you just buy this at your local game shop to play in a tournament or something, you just have to find something to represent those tokens. And I think decks that include token generators really should include the tokens that they generate in order for you to not have to like rummage around and use things that are easily forgotten that they are creatures, which is why I think in a lot of real tournaments, like, the judges actually carry around real tokens. So that is something that I think that this deck could have really used, as well as a strategy guide to help you figure out what you're supposed to put in and take out against which strategy. And that's just a common issue with these challenger decks. But if you've had experience with this deck, or if you have experience with the fully upgraded tier version of this deck, let me know what your thoughts were about this challenger deck in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of these videos, you can hit subscribe. This is Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.